Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here, joined by Ed LaCour for the weekly Brain Porn. This is episode 3. Today we're going to talk about stuff from a philosophical bend, including a snippet from a story, or what is the poem bit? How would you describe it?
Well, it's basically a mixture of the John Galt speech with some Zarathustra from Nietzsche.
All right, there we are. And we're going to do some current event stuff, and then we'll get around to that juicy stuff. What of this week, what do we have that we can comment on? The Charlotte riots. We knew this was coming, right? The media is provoking it. The media is blaming Trump while they provoke it.
Yes.
It's
well,
hilarious.
I mean, this is the problem. There are a lot of people who want a race war. And it's the same old rabble-rousing stuff. It's the same stuff. This goes right back to the French Revolution. There's always a mob, and there's always a demagogue leading the mob. And if you pay attention to what the demagogues are saying, the whole thing is the usual cultural Marxist narrative. But the problem is that criminality is seen as acceptable behavior, which is why the fact that many of these people getting shot by the police or criminals doesn't bother them in the slightest. And this is the problem. The normalization of criminality is a key factor here, as is the destruction of the family.
I know, because I think the criminalization, the idea of criminality is one very important thing. It's not a chicken and egg problem here. The mob that goes crazy in these situations doesn't go crazy all the time. The mob gets provoked into it by someone up above, by the clergy or the media or the politicians or the establishment. The mob, which is just the people, are pretty honest. And they won't break the law if they think the police are going to come and arrest them.
Yeah. Well, whereas if you're turned against the police, I mean, this is the French Revolution. This is the Bolshevik Revolution. The mob in this case are people who have been turned against the establishment. And there's nothing wrong with criticizing the establishment. There's nothing wrong with fighting back, as long as you're within rule of law. The moment you violate rule of law, you are basically just a criminal. And can be, even though I may sympathize, the rule of law has to come first, because otherwise we can't resolve anything through reason and through debate. The moment the rule of law is compromised, then we're all animals.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting who compromises the rule of law. It's not the mob. It's the establishment that goads them into the rioting.
Yes, I mean, the establishment wants the breaking of the rule of law. They want different rules to apply to different groups of people. They want to racially segregate, and they're encouraging this. And this is why we're seeing the beginning of racial segregation dorms in universities and colleges. They want to bring us back to that because it's divide and conquer.
Yeah. And
so this is the problem. A lot of these writers, they don't realize they're being used. And they're just so full of hatred for the police, because hatred of the police is a major culturally indoctrinated, tribalistic state. And so it's watching the puppets dance, and nobody seeing the strings, and nobody seeing the puppet masters that really frustrates me.
Well, I've given up on the idea that 99% of people can be philosophers, and I think that there is always going to be a large number of people in society who can only grasp the concretes around them, and they can't think of the daily realities of the society as such. All they know is their life. So they're not going to be able to understand why things are happening. I think a lot of people are going to be in that boat for a long time. I think that they can be perfectly intelligent, educated people and still not understand why anything's happening. So at some point, philosophers and the upper echelons of intellectualism or whatever, we need to accept that as our charge or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to challenge the narrative. I mean, these people, it isn't necessarily everyday life. I mean, Lil Wayne, for example, recently got in trouble for saying that he hadn't really experienced racism in his life. But that goes against the narrative. The narrative is that there's racism everywhere, that all the white cops are evil and everything's racism. And that's that's the narrative, because that allows people to basically absolve themselves of responsibility. They don't have to accept responsibility. So the black communities themselves, the people in them, don't have to accept responsibility for the destruction of their family. They don't have to accept responsibility for the criminality. They don't have to accept that they're bringing on a lot of this cop violence upon themselves. And the problem is that also that doesn't allow us to then backtrack and go, well, why is the family breaking down? What caused this? Well, what caused this was the subsidizing of single motherhood. Yeah. The state deliberately promoted the raising of the children by the state because they figured out it's a good way of gaining control. Same thing with public education. There's always a pushback against black families getting their kids into chartered schools.
And people love those programs so much, you know. Yeah. How are you going to take away free education and payments to single mothers? That's so heartless.
Well, the thing is, there are black families that acknowledge that this is a trap. They acknowledge that this, and you see them. John Stossel did a fascinating show where he showed these black families trying desperately to get the kids into charter schools and out of public education because they knew that it's a plantation, it's a trap. Yeah. And yet there's so much hatred because the teacher unions and a lot of the authoritarian left hate that kind of thing. They want everyone in the same system where they can keep an eye on them. And it's really, really quite sad to see that there are plenty of black people who know what's going wrong, that know that the system, there is something wrong with the system, but it isn't a bunch of racist cops. That's a stereotype. They haven't been able to show racism is the motivation behind a single one of these shootings that they riot over. Not a single one. There have been examples where the police have acted inappropriately with excessive force, absolutely, but that's a separate issue.
One of the recent ones, it was a black officer, and the thing in California was a Chinese or an Asian officer.
They needed to fit that race narrative, but racism is a red herring. There is no white supremacist cops behind every bush. We're dealing with a degradation of society. The cops shooting people, yes, there is a problem to a certain degree. There is excessive force because of this increased authoritarianism. But that's a separate issue. I mean, the problem is that the black communities are completely disintegrated because of the fact that they have been the recipients of more social engineering than anybody else. Nobody receives affirmative action more than they do. Nobody receives vouchers and food stamps and everything else and single mother subsidies. If you look at all these parents, they're all women. There's no fathers anywhere.
And hilariously, they are the ones that are sort of tipping the scales and allowing themselves to be voted all this nonsense because without the minorities in the voting blocks, the Republicans would rule the roost in America. So
yes. I mean, because if you look at the people that they're blaming, they're blaming white people, they're blaming rich people, they're blaming the cops, they're blaming the successful, because that's what you do. To keep people down, you brainwash them into hating and blaming the powerful and the rich and successful, not seeking to emulate them. This is what Booker T.
It's a little more obvious why the Nazis blamed the Jews, because you blame the guy that's successful.
Yes,
the Jews were the bankers. They're the money lenders.
Yeah, because the Nazis didn't want to be seen to blame all rich people because they wanted to avoid the stigma of Bolshevism. So instead, they basically blamed a specific subset of the rich, hoping that would be enough if they could redistribute wealth through them. And it's the same thing with the black communities. By getting them to see the cops and white people as the source of all their problems, they're not going to be looking too deeply at the other possible alternatives. Because, again, all these black communities have been under democratic control for decades, 100% of them. And so most of these communities have been under at least like 50, 60, 70 years of democratic rule. And they were basically bought. And you started off with black people voting Republican because the Republicans were the party of liberation. They were the party of equal rights. And the Democrats were the party of Jim Crow and segregation. And yet all the Democrats had to do was offer them free stuff, and they all switched over. and it's really not all of them, and there are a lot of them that still have that work ethic. And these are some of the better, more successful Black Americans that we have today, that are screaming at the communities to wake up and realize that their communities are falling apart. You know, white people and cops aren't responsible for this 75% illegitimacy rate of birth. They're not responsible for the mass abortions that at this point looks more like a eugenics experiment.
And they kill 19 of each other for every cop that kills one of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's again because the gang culture and the drug culture and the criminal culture is seen as acceptable. You know, it's just who they are. You know, a rapper has to fake a rap sheet in order to gain credibility. I mean, that's just because it's contempt for rule of law. Now, who gains? Who gains from a contempt for rule of law? Not black people. No, who gains from?
But who gains from the Soviet Union existing? Nobody. It's just a disaster. It's just
the people at the top gain because they get to maintain their death grip on power.
But
the Chinese government are still in charge. Look
at the city of Detroit. Yeah. Who's the guy at the top of Detroit who gained? The whole city was destroyed.
Well, yeah, but the Democrats the incumbency rate in these failed urban areas is huge.
But now all the Democrats who used to rule the roost there have all moved. They all live in L.A. or Phoenix.
Yeah, not the leaders. The leaders are still there. That's the point.
Why would they live in Detroit? The leaders have gone.
Because they got power. I mean, they have total power. I mean, why is it there's still Democrats in power in these areas?
They're all the people running in Detroit now are blacks who couldn't afford to move.
Yeah, but the people in power are still the same Democrats they've been for decades.
I don't know. I think the people in power in Detroit in the 50s and 60s left in the 70s and 80s when it fell apart. I think they left their own. They bailed out of their own experiment.
Yeah, but their successors were still part of the same system, who subscribed to the same philosophy, and are still part of the democratic system. Yeah, and that's the problem. Nobody is asking, why don't we just vote for the other side for once? Nobody is questioning why it is that it's always Democrats, because they basically say, well, we've got to continue to vote for Democrat, otherwise will stop, and all that kind of stuff. They only see the downside of being taken off the government teat because they are completely dependent upon them. This reminds me of a psychological experiment that was done with some mice and other animals, and they found that what they basically did was when you offer a mouse the ability to press a button and basically get either a pellet of food or a heroin injection, the mouse will continually press the lever for the heroin injection. Right. And that's psychologically what's happening here. The dependency is so great now that they continue to vote for the people who destroyed their communities in the first place, and they won't admit. As far as they're concerned, the solution is not to kick out the Democrats that have destroyed their communities, but to vote for even more, or to force through the BLM list of demands, for example, to force even greater redistribution, even greater white guilt money.
Well, you know, it's like the line from Brothers Karamazov: if you offer a man bread, he'll wear chains for life. And they just can't wait to get more chains on them to get keep their food stamps or
yes, and the irony is that when they call right-wing black people Uncle Toms, they are clamoring for even more chains, in even bigger plantation, an even greater dependency. That's all BLM are asking for, really. Again, if you look at the list of demands, they want more federal government funding. They want more money poured into them, and it's not, they don't want all the things that would help them: the rebuilding of the family, the complete destruction of the public schools, and a complete free choice public school system. It may have to be funded some other way temporarily, but the point is that the whole one-size-fits-all public system has completely let down black families totally.
Yeah,
and the kicking out of every single Democrat in power, in Detroit or in all of these areas, all of them out, they're all charlatans, they're all crooks. And all the things that would help black communities, that BLM aren't looking into any of those things. Yeah. And the challenging of gang culture, the challenging of organized crime, the challenging of criminal culture, that there's no shame. They'd have no shame for criminal activity.
Yeah.
I mean, you see them in videos all the time.
When cops come to try to rectify a situation, you can be killed or beat up just for talking to the cops.
Yeah. The cops are the enemy. The criminals are the good guys. That's a complete reversal and they don't understand that without rule of law, they've got no economic prosperity. They complain about there's no jobs. Well, you drive jobs away by driving the police away.
Yeah.
And they're doing they have been brainwashed into destroying their own culture. And because that way they're kept in their place, they're kept in line, and they're kept voting Democrat. To keep them poor, to keep them desperate, you've got a guaranteed vote. The only people that gain from this are the upper echelons of the left. They're the only ones that gain from any of this. Because black people are not going to gain from BLM or gain from any of the riots or anything. The only people that's going to still be left standing with anything are the people at the top of the left who will still have power because they will still have that all-important locked-in black voting bloc.
Yeah, they're
like 80 to 90% vote Democrat.
Yeah, they've continuously been voted into office by people that they have to continually buy off. It's a cycle.
Yeah, but they have to destroy them in order so that the buy-offs work. Because if black people were successful, they'd eventually end up voting Republican, wouldn't they? The more educated they are, the more successful, the more invested, the better their businesses, the more taxes that they spend as a result of having more income, the more likely they'll vote Republican because they'll the more they earn, the more Republican they are. Just period. Because the more they'll want to keep the taxes down.
Exactly. Yeah. And
so success cannot be what the left wants. The left cannot want anyone to be successful because it completely destroys them. The less successful you are, the more likely you are to vote Democrat, because the more likely you are to see them as the only source. Because this is one of the things that left have done for over the last 50 years. They destroyed any perception, any awareness, any conscious awareness of alternatives to government when you're in a bad place. In the 19th century, people didn't instinctively think, well, I'm poor and therefore I should vote left wing. They would think I'm poor, therefore I should go to a charity. Well, I should go to a friend or relative.
Their policies certainly do prevent success if that's what they're interested in, is preventing success. Yeah. Their policies of no savings, government borrowing, government control, regulation do prevent people from getting rich and being successful, and prevent people from tasting the lifestyle that makes them realize that the government isn't their friend.
Yeah. I mean, it's not their friend even when they're poor, because of course it keeps them that way.
Yeah, but if you're poor and stupid and you go to some office and they hand you a piece of bread, then you think, great, I got bread because of this.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to ancient Rome and the bread and circuses. People were too busy eating government bread and watching government entertainment actually realize that they were just sheep kept in line so that the Roman authorities didn't have to worry about the public demanding a republic again. Because that was the point. I mean, the empire was afraid that there would be demands for a republic at all points, and so to keep the people sufficiently docile, they just had to buy them off, and a lot of people accept that. Look at all these brainwashed Bernie Sanders supporters; they're perfectly happy to just get more free stuff, demanding more and more free, open quotes, end quotes, from the state. And they don't care about where it comes from, and they don't care about the level of power and corruption that they will end up generating as a result of increasing the authoritarianism, the centralization, and the top-down micromanaging of everybody's lives.
They don't see it that way, though. Free college they want. Now, what would that mean? That would mean doing away with all the bureaucrats who charge money for it and just providing it for free. That's all it means to them. It doesn't mean any more than that. It doesn't mean bureaucracy. It doesn't mean corruption. It doesn't mean government power. It doesn't mean coercion. It just means ponies and rainbows and no more people charging people money. That's all.
In the case of Bernie Sanders, supporters have less sympathy because they're just spoiled. But in the case of black communities in urban areas, they are desperate. That desperation is legitimate. But at the same time, they're not realizing that any alternative would be better. Go to your local church. Go to your friends and families if you have trouble. Do not get it from the state. And do not vote for the people who would see you get help from the state. Because then you'll basically, the entire economy will be geared towards perpetuating that system and you'll never get out of it. And that's the problem. People don't see how the use of the state the monopolization of aid from the state is what causes the need for aid. And it's explaining the economics of that that's really, really tricky.
All right, well, let's draw a line there and move on to some next thing. What, speaking
Well,
of...
everybody's talking about the debate that's upcoming. In fact, it might be going on right now for all I know, because in my time zone, we don't have the channels that'll broadcast it live.
Into which Gary Johnson was not allowed. Is that right?
No, but I mean, people, there are some people who want his views to be aired, but most of the population just want to see the fight between Hillary and Trump. I mean, that's the main event. That's like trying to put a third candidate in between two heavyweight champions. You know, that's not. Nobody wants. People want to see Tyson. People want to see Tyson Holyfield. They don't want to see whoever the third runner-up is.
Well, what if it's more like putting a heavyweight champion into a ring with two straw men? I think that's probably more accurate.
In the case of Hillary, I'd agree, but people. I mean, Trump is a heavy hitter, no question of that. We may not agree with him, but he's a heavy hitter. I mean, he destroyed every single Republican candidate. You've got to give that. They're all his bitches now.
Yeah, even if it wasn't substantive what he was saying, he would definitely make a response that the crowd would find.
Yeah, and that's the important part, unfortunately.
Yeah,
he's a true. He knows how to play the democracy game.
Yeah, there's no protection against him and Hitler except to make sure that when they do get into power, they don't have any real power, and you know, this
is why I was arguing with someone in the previous hangover just now, hangout, whatever, and yeah, I know, and I was arguing that the growth of the executive branch is disastrous because it just means that everything now depends upon who gets into office. This is why despite the fact that Hillary and Trump have the biggest negatives of any two candidates in all of political history of America, so much is riding on this. So many people are so committed and fanatical on both sides. And this will be the most watched debate in human history because the executive branch is everything now. It's grown into a quasi-monarchy.
Won't it be amazing if Hillary has a coughing fit or faints or both?
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, anything goes at this point. It could be complete chaos, or it could be the most boring thing you've ever seen, and everyone will be disappointed.
I've heard that Obama has proposed to postpone the election.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember there's a lot of paranoia. This happens at the end of every presidential run. The progressives were saying exactly the same thing about Bush at the end of his run. I got a lot of the people like Mike Malloy and I don't think Rachel Maddow, but she was associated with people who were saying this, were basically convinced that Cheney and Rumsfeld and Condoleezza Rice would do something to prevent the next election, or they'd seize power. And so I've been listening to a lot of Alex Jones, and he's saying exactly the same thing about Obama. He'll try to postpone the election. And the thing is, if she is ill and has to drop out, that is fairly unprecedented.
Yeah.
But the thing is, she hasn't really been doing all that much to campaign anyway. She's been fundraising, but she hasn't been delivering. I mean, she didn't speak to the media for like over 100 days.
Yeah, but the media is doing it all for her.
Yes,
you know,
of course.
Media is her machine. So the media is all against Donald Trump. So
even CNN has been just horrifying people with its level of slant, but still, I mean, at the end of the day, Trump's a big boy. He can take it. And to a certain extent, it's a trial by fire for him, and I kind of respect that. The more the media goes up against him, the more I sympathize with him.
Right.
And the more other people sympathize with him, because he is an FU to the establishment.
It looks to me like he's going to win, and I think that voter fraud is the only thing that'll make the Democrats have any chance at all. And I'm sure that there will be massive, massive, widespread voter fraud. But,
yeah, well, a lot of dead people will be voting, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a democracy anymore; it's a necrophacy.
Right.
But yeah, the thing is, this is the interesting thing about the left. They don't care about democracy unless they think they can win. Right. I had a huge argument with in the previous hangout. I was arguing about the whole Brexit vote. And when the Brexit vote shocking. I wasn't surprised because I've been saying for years that we were going to leave the EU. So I called it completely. A lot of other people didn't. And when it came out that we were going to leave the EU, the Remain camp, the pro-EU side, all left, went ballistic, and they demanded a second referendum. They wanted the referendum declared null and void. They said that old people should be stripped of their voting rights. And so you ended up. I mean, it was horrifying. There were loads of articles in like the Guardian and other left wing rags who were basically saying, "Oh well, democracy has been it is overrated. We need to go beyond democracy." So you see that the moment that it's like the Nazis. The Nazis alternated between trying to take over through a military push and using democracy. And in Goebbels' writings, he basically goes, "What's the difference? We can manipulate the public through force, or we can use it through propaganda. Either way, where we get what we want." Fascists and authoritarians and Marxists don't care how they gain power. Democracy isn't a sacred principle that needs defending to them. It's just one of many possible tools. They'll drop it in a second if it goes against them. All they care about is power. This brings us back to the black communities. They will destroy black communities if it means keeping power. Because look at the only people who manage to stay in power. It's always the same people. It's always the usual suspects.
And for the other camp that doesn't want democracy, they want a constitutional republic.
Yeah.
The people who want the democracy aren't, as you point out, in favor of democracy. They're totalitarianism at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, they want democracy as in tyranny of the majority.
Yeah, democracy as such is very ephemeral. It means a free vote once.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting how it's been fetishized, and what can that lead to? Only a growth of totalitarianism. Only.
Yeah.
Because if you don't respect rights, then people are eventually going to vote to violate rights.
Yeah, well, it's just what the Nazis did. I mean, this is what people need to understand. The use of the term democracy is just dumbing down the nuances of the issue. It's constitutional limits and individualism that grant freedom and justice, not democracy. And the election is an important part of it, but it's the Constitution that's so important, which is why having a loose approach to the Constitution is so dangerous, because the looser your approach to the Constitution, the more arbitrary and absolute power the state becomes.
And thank you, Woodrow Wilson, for his, 13 points, 14-point speech, where he said to make the world safe for democracy. And I'm sure it was fetishized. He's obviously not the first person. He's not an original thinker. But, fighting the Great War to make the world safe for democracy was one of the first steps in fetishizing for the masses this idea of democracy, and always get the people to vote. We let the Iraqis vote, and that went over well. So because at the end of the day, the left can always trust their ability to control the mob. All they have to do is to get just enough people, and they can order the death of Socrates, because that's ultimately what it's about. This is about the death of Socrates. It always boils down to that. All of Western history is a comma on his death. Nothing else matters. This is about the individual. This is about freedom. This is about rights. It always boils down to that. And at the end of the day, people will try to kill Socrates, whether it's with a gun or with a voting ballot. Yeah.
And we need to bear in mind, this is about the individual. Everything boils down to the individual. And in the case of the black communities, the problem here is that they are seeing themselves, and they are being cast by the media and by the left as blacks, as about the black community this, the black community that. There's never any thought for the individual. The individual black person is not part of anyone's calculation or equation in this one, with the exception of a few people on the right.
And we asked for that when we instituted affirmative action laws in the 1970s. We said the color of your skin matters. It's very important. You can get or lose a job based on the color of your skin.
Yeah.
From that point forward.
And you see how it's destroyed South Africa, because what they did was when Mandela's communist, because basically that's what he was, basically a communist, and his party's communist. When they took over, they basically instituted super affirmative action, which meant that all the qualified people that ran the factories and the industries in the power plants and everything else, who happen to be white, because due to apartheid, the white people were more likely to be educated. They basically just thought, screw it, we'll just fire them and put black people in charge who didn't know how to run anything. And so the economy of South Africa has been in the massive death spiral for the past 20 years. I mean, it's one of the biggest economic collapses in human history. And nobody's talking about it because it's an example of what's wrong with both Marxism and affirmative action.
Mm.
I mean, whites are now an incredibly persecuted minority in South Africa.
Zimbabwe,
but that doesn't fit the narrative. Yeah.
Zimbabwe, just to the north, is another example of anti-white racism, and that's not gone over well for their country at all. And it's not Zimbabwe now. What's it called now? They've changed their name, but
I can't remember now.
Yeah, but all right. So let's touch on immigration, because we were talking about that a bit, and we wanted to say it on. You have mentioned before, I think, in one of the Hangouts, that you thought 50 governments was the minimum that the world should have.
Yeah.
And that one world government, therefore, is a bad idea, just because America's 50, round number, etc. So you want borders and stuff, but ultimately, if immigration is a bad thing, which I don't think you think it is, a country should be able to control their borders if there's a situation where immigration would be a bad thing.
Well, it's an issue of law and order, and it's an issue of security. I mean, if you're at war with a country, if you're at war with a neighboring country, for example, if you don't have a closed border, you're in deep trouble. Because you could have invasions, you could have saboteurs, you could have assassins, and any number of things. I mean, so the security issue is there, but there's also the cultural. This is the problem, the cultural issue. The left have made a big deal out of trying to make the claim, the narrative, the dogma that all cultures are equal. And by doing that, they basically destroyed morality, because different cultures have different moral values. And by saying all cultures are equal, you're saying all moral values are equal. So the Muslim down the road, or the Chinese immigrant who believe in Islam or communism, respectively, their ideas are equally valid to people who believe in individualism and freedom. And that's the problem. Those aren't compatible. Those aren't ideas that can coexist, and those aren't therefore people that can coexist. Those aren't good neighbors. They're deliberately mixing genuinely, truly incompatible ideas, because the left are intellectual and moral nihilists, and they don't see the problem. They don't see that multiculturalism is a terrible idea and open immigration is a terrible idea. You need to have some minimal standards for immigration control. You can't just have a jihadi, you can't just have a Saudi Wahhabist just come through, no problem. He will cause problems one way or the other, because his values are diametrically opposed to everybody else.
And it has taken a lot to get it to the point where this is allowed. 50 years ago and 100 years ago, this would not have been allowed. They simply wouldn't have allowed this sort of immigration. So it's
because people could grasp concepts, because it's if you break it down, they can't grasp the differences in cultures, because they can't grasp the differences in moral values. They can't grasp the differences in ideology and values and concepts. If you break it down, right down, it's total intellectual nihilism. It's moral nihilism, but it's a symptom of intellectual nihilism. They can't grasp that there's any ideological differences that are of any significance at all. They think everything is just opinion and it's all perfectly harmless. It's a spectacular level of naivety. But this is why Angela Merkel has just lost control of Berlin. Her party has just completely lost control of Berlin now. It's all been handed over to other parties.
Yeah,
huge, the biggest election defeat ever, and it's because of this obsession with getting rid of borders and having people from unvetted from the worst cultures in the world, because cultural differences are meaningless to moral nihilists, but not to the regular, ordinary German people.
And we'll see how far out they are able to get in Germany with their new government, because the establishment might be so cemented around that, a new party doing anything might take a virtual revolution.
I mean, the media are doing everything they can to smear anybody that votes for the alternative party of Germany.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And of course, we know that slimy little toad Zuckerberg was caught conspiring with Angela Merkel to block people on Facebook for criticizing her immigration policy. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you disagree with open borders, mass immigration, you are a racist. That's how the left operate. They
Yeah.
don't care. They assume that every single issue that you have with open borders and mass immigration, whether it's security, cultural, institutional, infrastructure, whether it's healthcare or educational, school spaces, jobs, economic issues, any number of problems that people have experienced in their daily lives been caused as a result of mass immigration, particularly from places like Syria and Afghanistan.
And Zuckerberg.
They just assume that all of those things are smoke screens for bigotry. This is where, because the cultural Marxists mixed Freudianism with Marxism in order to be able to pathologize anybody that disagrees with them. If you disagree with their open border policy, you are a bigot, and they somehow know that what's in your heart. They somehow know that you're a pathological bigot or something, and because
Zuckerberg, to the point you were making, I just wanted to expand on that. Zuckerberg is just one example of that. Before you go off onto another thing, I just wanted to address what you said.
Yes.
Zuckerberg, Twitter, and even Google has been found. If you search for things on Google about Hillary, it will not suggest the bad things. It suggests like, Hillary Clinton emails, not Hillary Clinton scandal or whatever. It's biased. Even Google, Twitter, Facebook, and
well, YouTube is now phenomenally corrupt because they've got that new heroes thing where everybody's been pointing this out, but it's entirely apt. They're using the Chinese communist style of peer suppression,
right?
And in order to censor.
If you get flagged, then they review it and
yes, and they're even able to review and scan the subtitles in case you try to bypass by not tagging your own material as something that will get flagged. So yeah, it's now total Orwell now. So this is why there's an increased surge for alternatives to YouTube, which I'm currently looking at now.
Yeah, Stephen Lauder of Louder with Crowder did a video episode titled "End of YouTube Party," because his channel obviously is going to be demonetized, and he makes his money by getting views. So
yeah, well, some people are moving to Minds.com. Which is a social network. So a lot of people, and this is another one I can't remember what it's called. And so yeah, the SJWs and the progressives have won. They won social media. They basically have the Twitter council that was set up, for example, all far left, every single name. And so you've got Twitter, you've got Facebook, you've got YouTube, all of them with a hard left agenda, all of them. There isn't any alternative. All the social media is now theirs. And they've helped cultivate this. This is why we call them Tumblr feminists, after all, because Tumblr is another example, where you get these microcosm cultures, these subcultures that just drive themselves to ever-increasing degrees of fanaticism. But it's useful because we can use that to plot on a graph the trajectory of the movement. So a lot of people, when we started hearing about trigger warnings and microaggressions, a lot of people weren't surprised by this because we already saw this in the Twitter space and in the Tumblrverse. So we know where it's going. We know the kind of fanatical madness that the left are going to destroy Western civilization with.
Yeah, what they're goading people into. But we also know that people, given the choice, don't want it.
Yeah, so they need to experience the oppression themselves. This is why Generation Z, as they're called, the post-millennial generation, this is why they're statistically more conservative now. Because they're seeing liberals and progressives and the left as the decaying, corrupt establishment. Because, my God, they are. And so conservatism is the trendy rebel position. Isn't that hilarious? Who'd have thought... When we were growing up, who'd have thought conservatism would be the cool rebel position?
Well, it sort of was inevitable because it can't swing too much farther unless we go straight to actual real communism. Yeah. The pendulum swings back and forth in some sense. And the tree of liberty has to be replenished every generation or two. Like Thomas Jefferson said, God forbid we go 20 years without blood being shed for the cause of liberty in this country.
Yeah.
So every generation or to. We've got to do something, and every generation has to learn for themselves that liberty's not free and that you have to pay for it.
Yeah, because they take it. I'm guilty of this myself. I'm guilty of taking freedom for granted. For years, I wasn't paying attention to the left because I just believed all the right wing talk about how they want to destroy liberty as just being a political hyperbole. But yeah, when you actually see what they're really like, yeah, that they will censor you. Because I used to criticize Christianity a lot, and everything was going swimmingly, and then I started criticizing Islam, and all of a sudden the game changed. And I was basically censored. I was banned. I was demonized to a tremendous degree. The left I was perfectly happy to leave them alone, and they were happy to leave me alone to do my critiques of Christianity.
Yeah.
And everything was fine. They understood that I was doing this for intellectual and philosophical purposes. It's nothing personal. I've got nothing personally against Christianity. I just like critiquing it. And then when I did the same thing with Islam, all of a sudden I'm a racist. But because they see Islam as Christianity for brown people. That's literally, they don't understand that there are profound differences. And how many times have you seen on a hangout, I'm talking to some leftist, explaining the differences between Islam and Christianity, done this over and over again. They will not accept there are any differences.
Yeah,
they are absolutely because they barely understand Christianity and they know nothing about Islam. So they just take Christianity and extrapolate it onto Islam, and that's the truth. And as they're the same, the only possible reason you could object to Islam is because you're racist. Because the only difference to them is skin color. Because that's the only difference in anything.
Actually, the only reason that you could be in favor of Islam is if you don't know about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, every one of these. This is why a lot of the more intellectually capable people are abandoning the left now, because the intellectual suicide that the left are committing over Islam is hilarious. The entire position depends upon you not knowing anything about it.
Speaking of which, Dave Rubin left the left. He was very leftist, Canadian Broadcasting Company guy. I think he was with the CBC or something. He was up there in Canada doing his jig. He moved down to LA and he's independent now. And he recently did a talk with Steph Bot 4 days ago, Steph Molyneux, which I'll point the viewers towards if you haven't found it or seen it. An interesting talk. And Dave Rubin, who I thought was a leftist Geraldo 5 years ago, is now like a John Stossel wannabe or something like that. He's coming up in the world, sort of.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, he couldn't toe the line. I mean, unlike all the rest of those brainwashed simpletons at the Young Turks, who just toe the PC progressive fascist party line every single step of the way. The moment they step out of line, it's like, again, being a leftist is like living in Maoist China. The moment you step out of line, say anything wrong, everyone turns on you and they know it. And so I feel if they weren't the most irritating bastards on the planet, I feel sorry for people on the left, because it must be like being in a prison camp. Because you have to watch your step and watch your move every step of the way. And Rubin just couldn't take it anymore. He basically screw it. He basically just left Young Turks and left the whole thing behind. And for those of us that weren't even left wing, we still get that sense of betrayal, because I didn't do anything to the left. They turned on me because I started criticizing Islam. I had no idea that they'd made it into such a sacred cow, and that they were that stupid that they can't see past skin color.
And Dave Rubin has moved to the right, and he's going in almost an objectivist direction. He even had Yaron Brook.
Yes. Yeah, and he didn't disagree with anything Yaron Brook said.
Right.
Anything. I mean, it was just because how can you? Yaron Brook is the most reasonable guy you'll ever meet.
And I think he gave lip service to the definition of selfishness as being, helping yourself, or being good, being rational and helping your own life. He actually gave lip service to that definition as being correct.
I mean, it is a problematic definition, because you have to constantly break it down for everybody else. I mean, explaining that. What was the architect? The selfless architect in Fountainhead's name.
Peter Keating?
Yeah, Keating. Keating is the archetypal selfless person. we have to explain in great lengths why selflessness is bad, because it basically means you're an empty vessel that has to constantly depend upon other people for approval or control or whatever. I mean, megalomaniacs, sadists, all these people that have unhealthy desire to control and manipulate other people, they're all selfless. They're not content in themselves. People who are content in themselves, they make the best human beings. Yeah. Period. They're not using people. They're not in a dysfunctional relationship. They're not either a martyr or a victim or a sacrificial lamb to some other demagogue or demagogues themselves. Because it doesn't matter whether you're the lamb or the guy sacrificing the lamb. You are dependent upon the other. It's a sick symbiosis and parasitic relationship, and that's what selflessness is.
Once you've gotten to the point where you take the idea of selfishness as a virtue seriously, and you've taken it that way for long enough, then it's really obvious to you that a selfish action is an action that benefits you. That concept itself does not include has to also hurt other people. You know, and once you understand it from that direction, why do people tag that on? A selfish action is something that has to hurt other people and ultimately hurts you too, right? A selfish action doesn't help you, does it? It hurts you and it hurts other people. Now, that's a very, very strange action.
Yeah. And well, because they can't grasp mutual individual rights, because if everybody's operating selfishly, and everybody acknowledges that because all it takes is the recognition that everybody else has the right to operate selfishly too. If you recognize everybody else is operating on their own self-interest, and you have no right to intervene with that any more than they have a right to intervene in yours, it's just it's just consistency. That's what they don't understand. It's consistent selfishness means you're less likely to violate other people's rights than anybody else. Period, because you have logic on your side. This isn't some highly vaunted principle here. This is just logic. Why would I violate other people's rights? I mean, because we all have the same rights. That's the whole point. My violating other people's rights invalidates my rights. And I care about my rights because I'm selfish. And that's the point here. And
interesting how we can tie that principle to equality before the law, where everybody is equal. And if you're selfish, you don't want anyone to be treated differently in front of the law because you believe you're equal to other people if you're selfish.
Yes, because I recognize that the moment that anybody gets different treatment, that completely shatters the primacy of individualism. And individualism is the only true source of equality.
Yeah, and tragic how they misunderstand what that means. Equality before the law is all that means.
Yeah, because they don't want equality before the law. They want racial preferences. They want divide and conquer. They want political control through racial preferences. And so to them, equality now, of course, means economic equality, which is absolutely catastrophic because every single regime that's ever tried to impose economic equality on the people has ended up destroying the country.
Yeah, but it's a fetishization of equality, and it's just misunderstanding the context. Equality before the law and equality of outcome. Two totally different systems.
Yeah, because one is the protection of rights and the other is violation of them. They're literally morally in opposite ends of the spectrum.
So when you see people walking around saying equality now, could be good, could be bad, you got to find out their philosophy. Same thing with freedom. People want freedom to attend university at no cost. Is that freedom? No,
yeah, because they talk about freedom from hunger, freedom for the need to worry about clothing and that kind of stuff. You want to be free from reality by putting the burden of actually dealing with reality in a rational and adult manner on someone else. They want freedom from burden, freedom from responsibility. And the more people want free stuff, the more the taxpayer bears an ever greater burden.
And this is an additional reason to be careful about the Gary Johnson crowd, because, and I know he's not a real libertarian, but the libertarians are selling freedom, but what's their philosophy? What's their underlying philosophy? And so They're not as shiny and nice as some objectivists think. They prefer any libertarian over Trump. And Trump's at least a businessman who can get out of bed in the morning and pay people's paychecks that are working for him.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like Bernie Sanders that has been a parasite. I mean, Bernie Sanders has used ideology, has used brainwashing, has used government power to get other people's money his entire life. He's never generated any wealth. He's only ever taken it from other people. So the net result and the net amount of wealth generated in the world as a result of Bernie Sanders is zero. Whereas with Trump, you could at least argue that he has made money somehow. Although people have often pointed out that he's lost a lot of money as well. But you know, that's the price you pay for actually trying to be productive and honest.
Yeah, well, people point out a lot of things. When you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, then people can criticize you and say whatever they want, but you've still got big piles of cash. Can't argue with that. It's real. Yeah. So I love I read his book, The Art of the Deal, and there was a jumbo jet for sale, and it was $17 million. And he called them up and he says, I'll give you 10. And they said, screw off. And then like 6 months later, they called him and they said, we'll take the 10. And he said, I'll give you 7. So he got it for $7 million.
Yeah, but that only works if you know nobody else is going to buy it for the price they want. I mean, that's the tricky part. How on earth do you anticipate everyone else? And you can't. It's a crapshoot. I mean, it's blind. It's really, really, really sort of gambling. And but unfortunately, that's life because we're not omniscient. So we have to operate on limited knowledge. We have to make the best guess we can, but we have to limit the scale of disasters.
If you're prepared when luck, you say it's basically gambling, but when the dice come up right, if you've got $7 million because you've saved and you've got money, then you get an airplane, a really nice big airplane for $7 million, which they cost like 70 million new, something like that. So.
Yes, it's strategizing with a margin of error, quite a wide margin of error at times. But the point is that people are going to be making mistakes, and someone like Trump has lost huge amounts. A lot of his projects have gone under. But the thing is, that's true of the private sector, period. Yeah. And they'll have to live in this utopian fantasy where no one should ever be unemployed. Everybody should be guaranteed this and guaranteed that because they believe very much in positive rights. Positive rights is basically slave talk. Because the only people in history that have ever been able to claim that they are guaranteed to get food, guaranteed to get clothing, guaranteed to get housing are slaves. Because, of course, it's guaranteed because the slave owner has to give that to you. Otherwise, your slaves drop dead.
And in a rich and wealthy economy, in an advanced economy like ours, you should not have a guarantee to a job because maybe what you're doing isn't going to be valuable in 5 years. Maybe people are going to invent some other thing, and you're going to have to retrain or.
Yes, I mean, this is the sinecure problem. I mean, you end up creating a sinecure, which is a position created by someone who just wants to give someone a job for the hell of it. It's a token job. It's a make-work job. It doesn't really amount to anything. It doesn't mean anything. But at the end of the day, you want to employ people for the sake of employing people because you think that the economy exists for man. But it doesn't work that way because the economy has a certain logic to it. It's like any other scientific discipline. Economics is a science, or should be, and you don't just say, well, this is Lysenkoism. The left's approach to economics is pure Lysenkoism. Lysenko believed that you could have agricultural policies, you could have biological policies, economic policies to fit the agenda, to fit what they perceived to be in mankind's best interest or the interests of the party, depending on how cynical they were. And that's not how reality works. Real agricultural principles, you have to bow, take a knee before the reality of the universe, and that's the problem.
I think a really good metaphor is that the market forces are a lot like the wind and the rain. You can't push against them. You have to accept that they're there and work with them in mind. Market forces are not going to be done away with, like the wind and the rain and the waves, will not be done away with. They will continue.
Yeah, so, and every single time the government tries to push against it, they end up causing complete total collapse. Everything either slowly bleeds to death or outright collapses.
Yeah, it's amazing how much of the world probably persists on the fact of economic innovation in the United States. I mean, no one would have any computers. They wouldn't have the internet. They wouldn't have hats. Americans invented hats.
Well, most medical innovations are made in America because America has got the most private-based, at least, and not for much longer, of course. But this is the tragedy of it. I mean, all this innovation.
I have to take a call real quick.
Okay. Well, I'll just carry on. The problem is that when you're dealing with private sector, you're dealing with a level of innovation far beyond that of central planners. And so people take for granted, essentially, the amount of innovation, the amount of new ideas, the amount of patents, the amount of inventions, the amount of medical breakthroughs that are made through more private-focused America. And they think that the innovations will just sort of happen on their own. It's the blank out phenomena. And so you've got all these left-leaning healthcare policies in Scandinavia or in Europe that say, well, we can have free healthcare. And what's the problem? The problem here is that because you're entirely dependent on the state, there's so little innovation going on in the healthcare programs of Europe that without America, you'd have no innovation at all. You'd be basically like the Soviet Union. And they don't appreciate the positive. This is one of the reasons why I hate it when people blame America for everything. They are not seeing the positive. Most people don't see the positive side of America because it's so big and it's so interesting and intricate. Little things that you just never occur to you. How many of the medical innovations that your socialist system in Canada or Britain actually is from America? You've never even asked that question. Never even occurred to you.
All of them.
Yeah, most of them. Well, Britain is second only to America in terms of amount of patents, amount of scientific innovation. So a percentage of our medical technology is actually developed in Britain. But the rest, the bulk of it is America. So in Scandinavia,
medical companies in Germany and Switzerland and so on. Switzerland has 8, if I remember right, they have 8 large pharmaceutical companies, like world class. And all the rest of Europe put together has 7.
Yeah.
Which is pathetic. But
well, this is the problem. The more socialist leaning the country, the more dependent upon America it is. So all these smug Marxist bastards that go on about how their system is better than those evil, greedy, capitalist Americans. Without those greedy capitalist Americans, you'd have nothing. Your system would have ground to a halt long ago. And that's why I despise socialists and Marxists, because they're so ungrateful and they don't see that their entire system is a facade that's propped up by capitalism. Capitalism is the only reason why there's any socialist and Marxist regimes still around.
There was an excellent book, I forget the author, but it was titled East minus West equals 0. The idea that the East can't do anything without the West, and everything they have is a result, a reflection, an import from us in the West. So,
I mean, Bill Whittle, I should look this up, but Bill Whittle did a fantastic video where he basically pointed out that every single so-called innovation of the Soviet Union was a rip-off of America. I mean, he just went through quite a comprehensive list. It was a fascinating video.
Yeah, Bill Whittle is very good. I've been on to him for years. So Arcane Logos has been over here in the side in the chat for a bit. We should pay more attention to the chat. I wasn't even looking at it. But we'll be posting the join link now and be doing our second hour public. So anything to finish up before I post public things around? Yes, Q&A will now, Thought Criminal.
Well, we've also got we've got the poem thing to do, but we don't have to do that this week.
Oh God, yeah, we were not supposed to talk about everything else the whole time. Well, let's see. Let's do that for a bit before we post the join stuff. But yeah, Thought Criminal. I'm looking in the things now. I wasn't watching the chat before, but now I'm watching it. So if you have a question, pop that in there. So he takes a second oath, or is that the title you want to give it?
Yes.
Go ahead and read through, and then we'll discuss it. Yeah. Sort of a mini Galt speech or something.
Yeah, it's basically videos on Nietzsche, and I decided to create a version of John Galt's speech. For those who are not aware, the culmination of Atlas Shrugged, the most important novel of the 20th century, was the Galt speech, which is a 500-page speech where the main character proceeds to outline in intricate detail every single aspect of his philosophy, right down to the fundamentals of the metaphysics and epistemology. It's the single most comprehensive speech in the history of English literature. It's an absolute masterpiece. So I thought, you've got this other character who's in the background in the book, and he's Ragnar. He is a pirate. He's not prepared to just sit and watch America collapse. He wants to accelerate the process and steal back the money that the government has stolen from the people. So he basically launches his pirate attacks, and he's much more of an aggressive, angry character than John Galt. And so I thought, what would his speech sound like if it was written in the style of the original John Galt speech? So similar kind of grammar, similar kind of poetic approach. But it outlines the philosophy and it can serve as a sort of bullet point of the various principles of both my philosophy and that of Mr. Cropper. So shall I read it out?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Okay, he takes a second oath. I seek those who would stand without shame, for whom the light of reason is the joy of a clear path, not an alien messenger of confusion and hate, but just an old Greek tool that alone can break these bonds they chose for us. We must all see with the same eyes, without the veils of grey, without the false hopes meant to hide the chains of old, all these new chain makers. All nonsense left to the dreams of our childhood, to bravely see the world and every truth, and to know what must be done. While the two greatest friends of my youth take their own mad, strange paths to happiness, you, my new friends, my crew, who would shake the hand of Thomas and John, and who spit in the face of Carl and Emmanuel, you will be the barbarians who go to sack Rome, but carry away Cato and Cicero from the flames you find already burning. I see all the powers that would steal back our fire and chain us up beside Prometheus for the sin of our self-interest, for our refusal to wear the rags of guilt, condemned for our embrace of life over death. I see now that all the powers of the world have stolen the fruitful knowledge and placed it back upon the tree, beyond our reach, condemning all of man to crawl in the dirt beside the snake. Know this, as we stand here, the numbers of the armies of Plato swell and swallow up all those few still standing at the banner of Aristotle. I see the laws and absolutes that are thrown from this world, so the lie they say is noble can sit upon its throne. I see those who shed blood for lack of anything to trade. They deny the red that pours forth alongside the black and white, for all they say is relative, all is emotion, not a single fact for man to know. They smile and say none can escape the grey as they hide behind the walls of opinion from the monster they once called reality. I seek those who would not take the poison sold as the cure, for they see the bodies it has made, while those that offer it will not, but stand and smile, hand held out to offer our deaths to us still, as the bloated corpses and their flies clash with the glint of the teeth and eyes of these mad salesmen. I see the ancient murderers who wish to place Galileo, Newton, and Faraday beside the body of Socrates, to finally end civilization forever, who daily pray that the next dark age never ends. But unlike all those giants on whose shoulders I stand, I see the evil. I see those who took the unholy oath to kill the mind. And this giant is going to fight back. I am Ragnarok. I am the end of your world. I will kill your America so the next one can be born. As my ancestors found this country but lost it, I will find it again now that its death is but a mercy. I take up this cup, not for duty, not for sacrifice, not for the sins of man, but to end my anger so that I may know peace, not the peace I had in my ignorance, but a new peace of truth and right, and of victory. And to those who ask why, as my crew destroys your ships and plunders this gold, I have but one answer. Thou shalt not steal.
Very good. I love how it ends with him plundering gold and telling them not to steal, because he's stealing what they stole.
Yeah.
As anyone who knows Atlas Shrugged and the basic line of the story knows what Ragnar is up to. So, excellent stuff. It does have so many echoes of John Galt's speech and some of the really good lines, but the third one down, but just an old Greek tool that alone can break these bonds they chose for us. What's the old Greek tool? It's reason.
Yeah.
Logic.
Logic specifically, yes.
Logic, yeah. Very good. Now, where will the ladies and gentlemen be able to find this if they wanted to listen to it, or they can just rewind this and listen again, I suppose, eh?
Yeah, well, I've got it on SoundCloud, so I'll just link it.
Oh, okay. There you go. Can put a link in the thing there. If you want to put it in the side, I'll put it. Okay, there we go. I'll just put that in the description. All right. Well, why don't you go over a couple of your favorite lines then? I could choose more of my favorites. I want to know while the two greatest friends of my youth take their own mad, strange paths to happiness. Who is that? That's in the story, right? That's in the.
Yes, that's John Galt and Francisco d'Anconia.
Okay.
Yeah, because the story focuses on the big three. They're the big three students. There was Ragnar, who became a pirate. There was Francisco, who became a playboy. And there was John Galt, who disappeared from the face of the earth completely. And every now and again, there's references to these three students. And they're basically the big three. They're the holy trinity of Atlas Shrugged. In a sense, John Galt is Jesus, and Ragnar is Peter, and Francisco is Paul, in a sense. Because there's something like Peter in Ragnar, because Peter was very violent and aggressive, and Jesus was constantly having to constrain him. And so I get the idea that that's kind of the relationship which John Galt and Ragnar had, because Ragnar was the hot-headed, tempered one, and but they were more concerned about him risking his life than the damage that he was doing to the U.S. Navy. But I do like the idea of some tension between the two sides of the strikers, because we only see one side in the book. We don't see the other side. We don't see Ragnar's side of it. And I think that was a terrible tragedy, because the story potential for Ragnar Dennisgold is phenomenal. I think he is the most untapped resource in the history of literature right now. I can't think of anybody else, because everything else has been done to death, but this one book hasn't been touched upon. And that's
so rich. So I'm much to do in it, and it's Atlas Shrugged is what 1,063 or 1,163 pages, yeah. And so you'd think she tied up all the loose ends and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that can be done with it. I mean, what was built during this time and stuff, stories can be written inside of.
Yeah, well, this is what I think. I see Atlas Shrugged as a universe to write stories in, like Star Trek or Star Wars. I don't see it as a single book.
I love that idea of like Dungeons and Dragons, where everybody can do their own thing and everybody's got their own pocket.
Yeah,
you can have your own stories inside the events of Atlas Shrugged. Yeah. That I think is going to be a fruitful future. I'm
already, as I say, I'm in the process of writing it. I've written all sorts of script ideas and treatments and tons and tons of stuff. Huge lines of dialogue between Kay Ludlow and Ragnar, for example. Because Kate Ludlow does her own thing at one point. She's the one that goes into London to rescue the Stowaway Girl, New York. And there's a scene where she actually climbs to the top of the Baxter Building in order to fly off the top, because she has to escape from New York. now, now I've got images of the movie Escape from New York by John Carpenter. John Carpenter is something of an individualist, really, really hardcore. Which is why when I think of Ragnar & Co., I sometimes think of Snake Plissken and the Escape movies, basically. Because if you watch the Escape movies, there's a very anti-authoritarianism in there. I mean, it's like very, very strong. It's just like, and there is a scene at the end where, particularly at the end of the second movie, Escape from LA, where he basically he destroys the whole infrastructure of the planet. He just destroys everything because he just says it's so corrupt, it has to fail. And so, yeah, it's that kind of mindset. It's going to burn the whole thing down, which if you have a constructive alternative is a good thing. And if you don't, you're just an anarchist. And that's the problem. That's the problem we're seeing with the riots right now. These people don't have an alternative. They just want chaos for the sake of chaos. You know, there's a difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. The French Revolution just wanted to destroy everything. And the American Revolution had a constructive alternative. It was in the name of the alternative that they destroyed the system. Whereas the French Revolution didn't have an alternative. They just wanted to see a load of dead aristocrats.
John Galt didn't destroy anything. He just walked away and let it do its thing.
Well, he stopped the motor of the world because he was the motor and he stopped himself.
Yeah, exactly. And he got thinkers to stop doing their thing.
Yeah, because they were the motors too.
You just take your hands off and it'll all fall apart. I mean, it's like the steering wheel of or the joystick of a plane or the steering wheel of a car. Take your hands off the controls and things will stop going well. And
it's the denial of the mind because the Marxists think in terms of labor. They think brute force. They don't think in terms of the role that the mind plays. So they'll say, well, workers' efficiency has improved to a huge degree, because I was hearing this rhetoric from progressives the other day, and yet the wages haven't increased. Well, why is the efficiency increased? Is it because they're working harder? No, it's because the machines are getting better. It's the managers are getting better at the increased efficiency. And so why would the workers get more money because of other people's efforts? That's the problem here. They attribute everything to brute labor force. They fail to take into account the use of the mind. They just see managers and employers and business owners as parasites because they don't understand the role the mind plays in economics, because they can't comprehend the existence of the mind. This is why I said those evil people who took the unholy oath to kill the mind. And so everything here refers to this approach, because when you don't, it's important to understand that the authoritarian and the far left want to destroy civilization, and they want to create nothing but devastation, because they don't gain anything from prosperity. They don't gain anything from peace. They don't gain anything because their economic approach is Keynesianism. Keynesianism is built around the broken window fallacy. That if you break something, if you destroy something, then you make work for other people to fix it. And the fallacy is, of course, that the infrastructure we've destroyed is no longer in use to build upon the economy. So you're basically resetting the economy back to zero over and over and over again. And this is why the left-wingers tend to start wars all the time. It's because they believe in the use of war and the expenditure of government power, because it's a good way of controlling the population, and also because when you destroy everything, you create more work for people. There's a lot of controversy about all the Iraq war and all the business contracts that went into building back the infrastructure. And the real problem should have been that the infrastructure was destroyed, and so you've now delayed the growth of the economy by however long it takes to rebuild the infrastructure. Rebuilding infrastructure isn't growing the economy, it's resetting the economy.
Yeah. We're not going to be able to get Iraq out of its mess without the rule of law there. That's the only thing. We can rebuild, just like we built steel mills and railroads for Soviet Russia. That didn't do any good for their society. You know, what did good for them was for the whole thing to collapse. And they don't need schools and roads. They need freedom.
Yeah.
So,
well, they need freedom through rule of law.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the West didn't realize that until the Enlightenment. And these people aren't even up to the Renaissance yet. So it's going to be centuries before they get their crap together, unless they just piggyback on the West like Dubai does. And even then, Dubai is still backward as hell.
Yeah. the Middle East is in for a ride because we don't even need their oil anymore. This is going to get hilarious over the next 10 years.
Well, it's about that time because getting rid off OPEC oil, I mean, that's a huge triumph that Obama fought every step of the way, of course. And the left are still absolutely fanatically, because they're making all these stupid, Hollywood's churning out all these anti-fracking movies at the rate of knots. It's getting us off OPEC. This thing that has been a millstone around America's neck for decades.
Yeah.
These greedy Saudi bastards who don't deserve any of your dollars now are not getting any of your dollars. It's great.
Just a night or two ago, I listened to Global Balkanization by Ayn Rand, which is I think it's in the Ayn Rand letter compendium, but I had read it years ago. I've listened to it many times, but I listened to it the other night just for the heck of it. And one of the questions that they asked during the Q&A was what to do about the Middle East problems. And she said a couple of things, but she said, for one thing, you don't go over there and build a bunch of oil wells and refineries and then allow the countries to nationalize them. I thought, wow, we're still dealing with that. They did that just...
Every single thing she spoke about then is still happening today. It's ridiculous. But isn't that an interesting paradox that the left want to both globalize and unite everything, but at the same time divide? They want, in other words, they don't want divisions that breed independence from authority. They want divisions that breed dependence upon authority. Because look at the racial, getting back to the problems of the black communities, the racial divisions there only build up more dependence upon authority. Because if the institutions are that corrupt, it requires even more institution to oversight. So they want to say that the local governments are corrupt. Well, not government, because they don't want to acknowledge that it's the blind spot. They will never acknowledge the existence of local governments because they're the ones really responsible for everything going wrong, a large portion of it. But they will demonize the local police so that they'll have the federal government oversight. And so the racial divisions build up greater dependency upon the highest levels of authority that have to basically keep all the sides apart or from killing each other. And so they deliberately create division in order to justify their form of unity, an oppressive unity, a parental unity. And it's the same model with a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. The reason why they had these strong dictators is because they had to have dictators to keep all the factions from killing each other. Saddam Hussein, for example, was the only reason why the Sunnis and Shias weren't constantly killing each other. He was keeping the whole thing, because this goes back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The end of colonialism. What they did was the French and the British and all that, they created all these different borders, and the borders were created that didn't match ethnic groups or religious groups at all. They either separated out like the Shiites because they took the Shiites and stuck some of them in Iran and some of them in Iraq, and then they took the Sunnis and they put them in with the Shiites of Iraq and the Kurds and all that. And they created all these different tribes squished together in a way that didn't make any sense, so that the only people that could control it all were despots. Yeah, because they didn't want divisions that would build independence. Because America, the states that America was built into were states that already existed. They wanted to build an independent country of independent states. That was the key point here, independence, so that they could grow on their own and they could work with each other on their own terms. And that basically means that the power is diffused away from the central authority into the states. Whereas the current division that the left want is the exact opposite. They want a global government and they want one centralized authority, because that's just the way their brains work. But at the same time, by generating greater degrees of division on racial grounds or gender lines or everything else, they build up this sense of grievance and victimhood and injustice, which builds in turn a sense of dependency. Because every time these SJWs or these LGBTQs or these feminists think they have a problem with this institution or that institution, what do? They go crying to the government. They go crying to the nearest authority. And so there's two kinds of divisions. There's divisions of independence and there's divisions of dependence. And you need to look for who's talking about that one kind of division rather than another kind. Because the people that are talking about divisions of independence are the good guys. They're the ones who don't want to lord power over everybody else. They don't want to build up dependence upon authority.
It's hilarious how they never for 1 second ever question the motives or the actions of government. Everybody else is under scrutiny. The government is never, ever scrutinized, doesn't do anything wrong, and is always above moral censure.
Unless it's a Republican in charge, in which case, obviously, they're racist.
Yeah, exactly. But it's hilarious that they love government. They are not skeptical of government.
Yeah. Well, they can't imagine, because their narrative is that one side is right and the other side is wrong. Well, the left are the good guys. So, as in, totally trustworthy, no ulterior motive. It never occurs to them. As I say, when I read a load of liberal books and progressive books during the Bush years, there was never any questioning of the moral authority that they bestowed upon themselves. There was never any question that there could be an ulterior motive. Even though the ulterior motive is pretty damn obvious, power, because it's always what they end up with. You know, they end up with more power for the longest period of time, and no matter what happens, it's always the same people with the same power. And they don't see the pattern. They don't see, even though, again, just look at who's in charge when the dust settles. You want to know what's really going on here. You want to know what it's really all about. Who's in charge? Who's left holding all the reins of power? And if it's always the same people, then maybe all that's really going on here is a stupid game, and these people are playing you in order to keep in power, or to gain more of it. People fail to underestimate the importance of power as a motive. It is perfectly possible that there are large numbers of people who only care about power and there's nothing else. Everything else is a smokescreen. And this isn't like paranoia. The left will play this game with the right. They assume all the problems that people have with immigration are just a smokescreen for racism. No, that's a phantom. That's a smear. It's not a smear when I say that it's about power, because they're in power. The power is an objective fact you can see for yourself. It's an empirical reality. Just look at who's in charge at the end of the day.
And it's very useful to get money, and to keep that, they'll kill. Hillary keeps killing. People keep dropping dead around her. So,
yeah. Well, karmas keep catching up with her, apparently.
Yeah, apparently it's. But she's a criminal and a killer now, and or has been for a long time. But so that's what they'll do for power. So I just wonder how many people are in graves because they crossed Donald Trump. I doubt that many. I mean, I think he does his stuff economically. I don't think he.
Yeah, because money doesn't corrupt. I mean, if that were the case, then the richest people of the world would always be the most corrupt, most evil. But if you actually look at all the top richest people in the world, some of them are good, some of them are bad, just like everybody else. The financial factor doesn't actually factor into it. It's only when that money buys you power, boom, that's when you're corrupt. Yeah. That's when you're evil. And
she got her money not from earning it, but from being in power.
Yeah, because she doesn't actually have any employment in the regular sense. Like Bernie Sanders, she hasn't any history of wealth generation. It's all political shenanigans. And so, because if you compare the financial issue to the power issue, every single time someone gets more and more power, they become more and more corrupt. There's no such thing as a good despot. They're all evil, they're all corrupt. Every single time, which is why we don't like despots, which is why being called a fascist is a bad thing. Which is why you want less power. Whereas with money, nobody seems to have noticed that the same rule doesn't apply to money at all. There is no reliable grade of corruption that directly 100% corresponds every time to the amount of money you've got. It's about power. If a guy mugs another guy for $10, he's $10 richer, but he's corrupt because of the mugging, not because of the $10. Whereas if a man makes $1 million honestly, he's not more corrupt, even though he's got $1 million more than the guy with $10, because the guy that got $10 did it through force, and the other guy did it through peace.
In the comments here, 37 says, if people want to get money out of politics, they should first get politics out of money, which is one thing that, as objectivists, we say that you should separate the economics from politics. So
yeah, it's not a case it's not a case of one then the other. It's a case of both, completely separate, totally. It's the only solution, and everybody knows, or the left knows this is a solution. The left complain about crony capitalism all the time.
It's mind-blowing to them. In fact, we've separated church and state, and they're not happy with that. They want to tax the churches. And we've separated intellectual thought and state, and they're not happy with that. They have thought crimes now. We have hate crimes. and
Yeah.
and so they're not comfortable separating the state from anything, but they do need to. It's our next thing. We need to separate church and state. We need to
they don't believe in separation of powers because they're pre-enlightenment.
Exactly.
I mean, at the end of the day, every single last mental and moral achievement of the Enlightenment has been abandoned by the left now. And the only reason why the right wing have any degree of Enlightenment values is because it's part of their traditionalism. So they're into the right thing for all the wrong reasons. And so the same thing with capitalism. Capitalism has always worked for America, and that's why it's a good thing. No, it's a good thing because it's morally the most superior economic philosophy that's ever been developed. Dumbasses. And they don't, they have a moral high ground they're not even using. It's hilarious. And so, the left their thinking is pre-enlightenment. Every single thing, if you read Adams, if you read Jefferson, if you read John Locke, if you read all of the writings of Tom Paine, they were all obsessed with separating out the powers, keeping it all limited, the power away from the state to the people, limitations, separations, balances, compromise models. As I say, the independence that empowers rather than independence that builds up dependency. And so they were obsessed with getting all this system right. And it was brilliant the way that all these different thinkers were thinking in parallel lines, which is why Tom Paine and John Locke were cited so much for the founding fathers, because they were all thinking in this way. This was the Enlightenment, recognizing that power corrupts, recognizing the need to limit, recognizing the need to have a society where every institution is geared around debate. This is another thing people don't understand. The whole parliamentary system, the whole multi-party system, the whole open forum system, the whole free press and free speech was all built around the idea that you resolve issues through debate and through, drumroll, reason. And what the left have done is they have rejected all of that. There's no reason anymore. There's just identity politics. There's no reasoning. There's no meritocracy. There's no record. There's no reality.
Because they don't need to debate to find out the answer. They have the answer. And if you don't like their answer, then you're wrong.
Yeah, no, you're not just wrong. You're evil and a racist. This is where the cultural Marxism comes in, because cultural Marxism isn't just the exploitation of culture wars for Marxist purposes. It's also Freudianism. They use Freudian tools to pathologize everyone they disagree with, everyone that has a mental problem. If you watch Rachel Maddow, if you watch Young Turks or the rest of these commie bastards, they will sooner or later get round to pathologizing their opponent. They've got this wrong with them. They've got that wrong with them. Trump is a sociopath. Trump is a psychopath. Some news article. Does Trump have problems empathizing with other people?
Yeah.
Everyone is a Freudian. Everyone is a pop psychologist. Because that's the key tool. It is they use Freud to bypass reason, to bypass debate, by bypassing the idea of the other person, even when they do acknowledge they have a mind. The only time the left ever acknowledge that other people have minds is when they analyze their dysfunctions. But they don't analyze the mind in terms of intellectual content, because that would mean intellectually engaging with people, and that is something the left don't do anymore at all.
Yeah, I was listening to PBS NewsHour a couple nights ago, and they were talking about Trump, and they were saying that he's subnormal or par, not quite normal, not quite par of intelligence or something. And I just thought, why don't you criticize something about what he's saying or what his policies are? Why are you attacking him in this way? And it's obviously why they do that, because they don't have any substantive thing. They have to take it away from substance, because their arguments are not scientific or substantive or objective or reality based. They're ideological and Marxist. So,
and they don't want to attack him on ideological grounds, because then it'd be transparent what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because the left love to pretend that they're not ideological. They say, well, political correctness isn't just a left-wing thing, or feminism isn't just a left-wing thing, or don't call him a Marxist, or don't use the term socialist. I'm a liberal. I'm a progressive. They hijack and twist all these different words. This is why they've redefined the word racist in such a ridiculous manner. Sargon of Akkad recently did a brilliant video where he basically just goes through this redefinition of racism. All of the SJWs I've spoken to all do this. They all use this Orwellian new definition of racism, and they look down on anybody that uses the word racist to describe people who actually have problems with other races.
Yeah, and they blame these people that are voting against them for being uninformed. 37 mentions this in the comments. They call us uninformed voters now if you vote for the right.
Yes.
These people who are ignorant, ignoramuses, uneducated ignoramuses are now calling other people uninformed or low information.
Yeah. Well, they have their darling pseudo-intellectuals. If you look at the left, there's a lot of public, supposedly high-level intellectuals that they have backing them up, and they have all their pet scientists that regularly go along as well, like Bill Nye, the science guy, and Neil deGrasse Tyson. They have the celebrity scientists. They have the celebrity intellectuals. The right doesn't really have all that many. The right prefer more of a folksy populism. And so they don't have people that they don't seem to revere the intellect.
We're getting them. We've got Milo Yiannopoulos. We got Louder with Crowder. We're getting a small code.
Yeah, this is the new generation. I mean, other than Thomas Sowell, the right haven't had an intellectual on their side since 1982, and we all know why they lost the last great intellectual in 1982.
Well, okay, Bill Whittle also.
Yeah. Well, he's not an he's so down to earth. He doesn't come off as an intellectual.
You're right.
That's the genius of him.
But he does pretty intellectual leaning stuff sometimes, quite a lot.
He just strikes me as a wise father figure.
Yeah, but he's different. Like Rush Limbaugh was for the people on the right, but he was just a fat idiot. Now we've actually got like Louder with Crowder, Milo Yiannopoulos. These people are criticizing. They're hitting the left where it's real, where they're not just establishment.
Well, I mean, they're doing two things. One, they're questioning the facts, they're questioning the data, and the two, they're going after the moral credibility. This is why the left hated Ayn Rand so much, because she basically didn't give the left she didn't give them an inch. She didn't give them any moral credibility at all. That was what so shocked and horrified the left. The left, at the very least, love to think that they're morally superior to everybody else.
Yeah.
And you take that away, and they are left floundering in the dark. It's the most beautifully hilarious thing. Never give them an inch. Nothing that because again, the previous hangout I was in, there was a guy who was basically saying that they have moral intentions. They have good moral intentions. And I was like, no, they don't. It's all power. They don't have any moral intentions whatsoever. They don't deserve any moral credit. Why assume that the reasons they give you are the real reasons when the results are disaster and the only one, and again, when the dust settles, who is it left in charge? That's what's really all about, because you don't think they know how this is going to end. You don't think they know there's going to be a disaster. You don't think there's going to be a collapse. You don't think like the 2008 housing bubble, for example, they knew it was going to collapse, and they knew that they'd get to pass new laws and get more power out of it.
Yeah. And if it's the moral versus the practical on their side, they say they're moral, and the Republicans used to say, well, we're practical. You guys may want the state to give money to all the widows, but we can't afford it. And but they don't have the moral high ground on the right. That's what they're always going to be missing. You cannot say it's impractical, therefore we can't be moral. You'll always lose to the guy who's morally superior. And the left, of course, have to, like you say, ignore Ayn Rand because she takes all that away from them. But it's a big hill we're going to have to get over to question altruism and to say that altruism as such is evil. Not just that it's not useful or questionable or there's another way, but that it is evil. That's going to be that's the hardest thing I think that we have to sell to the culture.
Well, I use like a visual. Altruism is basically saying that we're ants in a colony, and that any given unit is disposable, and that the individual, rather than being a disposable unit, is in fact the be-all and all of everything. The individual is everything. The individual is the most important thing in the universe, and the moment you stop accepting that's when we end up with death camps and gulags, because that's the logical end of it. The fact that we're not there right now is irrelevant, because we who perceive things logically know that's where it's going, and so in our minds we're already there. The moment you embrace collectivism, the moment you embrace authoritarianism, the moment you reject individualism, you're in gulag town, you're in death camp town. We're in Auschwitz, period. And the fact that other people don't see the steps leading up to that's unfortunately their problem. But we can. because we can connect the dots. We can see how collectivism logically leads to racism and tyranny and oppression and violence and bigotry that's manipulated by the state, etc., etc., etc.
Now, one thing that I do like to say when I'm talking to people who are on the left is, I say, well, okay, but people are going to be killed. And they, how is affirmative action going to lead to people being killed? Or how are public schools going to lead to people being killed? Or how is government control of the interest rate going to lead to people being killed? Well, right now in Europe, you have massive numbers of rapes, and that is not because of rule of law. Yeah. There are real consequences to this. Now, it might go far enough that we actually have large numbers of mass killings going on.
Yeah. Well, as I say, that there's a vigilante stuff that's going on in Europe. There's more and more vigilante stuff that's happening, and as I say, Germany has just the Angela Merkel's party has just suffered the greatest defeat over the control of Berlin in history since the unification of Berlin, because of this immigration policy where they just ignore reality. Narrative is everything. The fantasy is everything. She just thought that she could incorporate this open borders policy into all their politically correct narratives and cozy world they live in. And unfortunately, reality bit them in the dust, because everyone else in the German population have been able to pretend that their healthcare policy works, or their taxation policy works, or their regulation policy works, because they could hide from reality. But the thing is, sooner or later, reality is going to catch up with you. When that happens, there's a massive breaking point, which is why we're seeing more and more of a pushback against the authoritarianism of the SJWs and the censorship on YouTube and on Twitter and all the rest of it.
Yeah, more and more people, they're being faced with the in-person. They're being punched in the face by immigrants.
Yeah, because people are being demonetized on YouTube as we speak, and this is causing a massive backlash. Because it turns out that they're being demonetized because of things that the topics they discuss or opinions that they have that have been downvoted by some collective.
Yeah, and you can be flagged, and then they go look at your stuff, and if you're on the right, then they demonetize you.
Yeah. And the people that do this, these collective groups, these collective voting groups who get special bonus points, are called heroes. So they are the heroes who take away your money. And yeah, it's so Maoist, it's unbelievable. But now the people need to be effective, because the tragedy is that you can have terrible policies on economics, on agriculture, on regulation for generations, and people just aren't seeing the problem, because it isn't affecting them in a way that they can consciously process. It's affecting them in other ways that they can't perceive. It would affect the overall GDP and things like that, and they're not thinking in terms of the GDP isn't just some abstract number. It means the likelihood of you getting a job is lower. It means the likelihood of you retaining a job is lower. It means your pensions.
That's all difficult for them to grasp. But when a Muslim punches them in the face at the corner store, then they start understanding maybe these people aren't so good for my society. And sometimes it takes that. Sometimes you have to be punched in the face in your neighborhood, or have your daughter be raped, or have your house broken into.
But the problem is that then creates a class issue, because that has been happening in Europe, or more likely in the working class areas. And so the working class right now are rising up against the open borders policies, and they are now being dismissed out of hand by the middle class, the bourgeois leftists, as basically being a bunch of ignorant bigots, because, they talk with Cockney accents and they slur their speech, and they're not as articulate and educated. We are so much more enlightened than them. And so it fits their narrative that they're superior to everybody else. And what they're really doing is they're basically putting a rapist and a working class girl in the same room and locking the door, and then saying, if you complain, you're a racist, to the girl. That's what the left have done in Europe. And it's beyond evil. And as I say, they don't care that these communities are destroyed. But this is Tommy Robinson's main point, that the Luton community in London has been completely destroyed and taken over by Islam. You can walk down the streets yourself and see, although I wouldn't recommend it, unless you've got some pepper spray at least, or a dog and covered in bacon.
And are they at a point where they're going to do something serious about a backlash or something like that? or is this just going to keep
Well,
going? Quite
well, this is the problem. I mean, the problem is that kind of backlash plays into the hands of the white supremacists and racists. And so you've got the problem is that the left have basically opened the floodgates to the barbarians, and the people who don't like the barbarians because the color of their skin more than anything else are therefore exploiting, and because they're leading the charge to drive the barbarians out of the city, or at least some of them are. And so that in then turn means that the traitors who open the gates of the barbarians are then saying, look, these people who object to our open gates policy and pro-barbarian policy are all racist because they're objecting on the basis of skin color, and so on and so forth. It's just it's a sort of stalemate, a stalemate culture war.
Racist has become empty. It's empty.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it's the cultural Marxists have redefined racism to mean anybody in a position of authority over other people in a way that happens to correspond to skin color. But yeah, I'm sorry, even saying it out loud and it screws with my head.
If you say that there should be men's bathrooms and women's bathroom, we don't need any other option, you're called a racist.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have anything to do with race. It's just become. It was just the worst. And so now they use it to mean the worst people.
Yeah, because when I point this out to the SJWs, as I say, they criticize you for using the old-fashioned definition. So they get really snobby about their Orwellian redefining of words. So brainwashed, so twisted, and yet they don't see it. They don't understand that it's all ideology in their heads.
It's tragically hilarious.
Should we open this up, or?
Yeah, I've posted Join links around here and there. So 37 has made some comments over here on the side. Yeah, the BBC ignores Muslim rape gangs and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the BBC acknowledge it eventually, but only after all the newspapers have acknowledged it. Because we have some right-leaning newspapers, they are more likely to report this. They're the only reason why anybody knows what's going on. Because the BBC will happily ignore virtually everything that goes on. The level of corruption in the BBC, like every tax-funded organization, is horrendous. Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, that's why I don't have a television. It's because the BBC... I refuse to fund them, period. And this is something Americans need to understand. In order to avoid funding a communist propaganda machine in Britain, I have to forego having a television. I mean,
right. Just by having it, you have to pay them, right?
Yes, the TV, because they drive around with these vans with scanners on, and they basically scan televisions that aren't registered. So yeah, that's absolutely charming. Still, as I say, I'm not missing much. An Amazon account is pretty much all I need. Yeah, the problem is I can't see people's questions, so I can't respond to them. And it's a pity because I really would prefer to do so. But hopefully someone will join us eventually. Because I wanted to go through more of the actual poem here. So one particular line I really liked was, know this, as we stand here, the numbers of the armies of Plato swell and swallow up those few still standing at the banner of Aristotle. And what I find helpful is breaking down to the philosophical fundamentals everything that's going on in society. And being able to recognize when there's a Plato idea or an Aristotle idea, that's really, really tricky because we're so often dealing with ideas and people are arguing on cultural grounds or language grounds or on moral grounds. And this is particularly true of the left right now because they've got this Foucault sort of perspective where everything is language. Everything is reality is perceived through language, and language is how we think, and language is how we know everything. So they can basically address everything on language grounds. This is why they're so pro censorship. It's why they're so keen. Oh, hello, Brother John. I'm not sure. I don't think I can unmute you.
Let's see. I'll unmute you there. I'll give you permissions, Edward. My daughter's school just called, and she shut her thumb in the door of the bathroom stall. So.
Whoops.
Yeah. Not happy. We got Brother John and Sydney joining us. Sydney, thanks for showing me how to do these hangouts, because I've had to go in. Brother John, how you doing today?
I'm doing better than most.
All right. Good to
Hey,
see
Brandon.
you. How you doing, Sydney?
Good.
I've had to go back and listen to your little spiel on how to do this each time I've done it. I think I've got the hang of it now, but
Yes, I'm going to have to start watching them as well.
they've hidden.
So my instructions are sort of, follow point by point rationally and everything?
Oh, yes. It worked very well. It worked objectively.
That's the objective.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I don't know what you were conversating about, because me and Sid and I were in a chat in another room. We just saw that you would open, so we have no idea what you guys talking about. Didn't want to.
Basically everything.
Okay.
Yeah, Muslims and philosophy and stuff.
Cool.
We were looking. Sid and I said, remember, we were looking at the tenets, some of the rules of Satanism,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of. And it was weird. It was like a couple of them almost kind of aligned with objectivism.
If you're talking Anton LaVey, that's because he was libertarian.
LaVeyan Satanism.
Yeah, LaVeyan Satanism is just libertarianism called Satanism to piss Christians off. That's it.
Okay.
Oh, that's why I love it so much.
There you go.
Yeah. It's just he's just trolling.
Now they sound like objectivism. What? Because objectivism is anti-altruism, and the Satanists just basically went nihilistically against everything.
No, I mean, Anton LaVey is a consistent libertarian. He basically just took his particular approach to libertarianism, rebranded it Satanism, and basically just sold it like that. Because you could actually plausibly make the case that Satan was the good guy. Because if you look at all the bad things that God does in the Bible, I mean, flooding the world, killing children and women and that kind of stuff, and whereas all Satan does is basically just, give people knowledge of good and evil. Even when he kills Job's family, he does it under explicit permission from God in the book of Job. So, yeah, he doesn't really do anything wrong. And so you could say that he represents freedom and rebellion and responsibility, and God represents slavery and following orders to commit atrocities and all that kind of stuff. So you could actually make a case.
But there was one of the tenets I think I had a problem with, and I understand they were defining Satan, okay? And if we're going to go with the view of Christianity, I would say it was definitely correct. But the thing was that the Satan is the so-called sins. It said, right, were really means of gratification, something to like that effect. Sid was sharing the PDF. We were going a little bit through the Satanic Bible a bit, and that was one of the things in there describing Satan. And this was LaVey's Satanism.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, that's true. I mean, if you're a hedonist, and I think LaVey subscribes to various forms of hedonism, then yes, it does look like a lot of the injunctions are against hedonism, but some of them actually make sense. I mean, thou shalt not steal, for example, as I said at the end of my poem, thou shalt not steal. Yeah, that is a good rule, and there's no really, the basis of property rights, which is the basis of a lot of rights. Period. So some of it is against instant gratification, but at the end of the day, a lot of those rules are just sort of uptight conservatism. Not exactly the end of the world. A bit of moderation isn't going to kill you.
Well, some were saying that when they were speaking of so-called sins, it was the 7 deadly sins. It's supposed to be different than the 10 Commandments, because that's where I get the conflict. Is now one of the so-called sins is thou shalt not murder, right? So
yeah, this is fine.
Certain gratification.
But if you're dealing with the 7 deadly sins, there's like gluttony, pride, wrath. I can't remember them all now. I mean, pride isn't. Yeah, in that case, I definitely
probably.
Yeah, indulgence.
Roger, you had the 7 tenets up yesterday, didn't you?
No. The 7 tenets of Satanism, and then there was like 11 rules that were written by LaVey. But
Yeah,
what I'm
but
talking about, what I'm talking about was someone was saying that part about this when they say Satan is the so-called sins are really means of gratification. Someone was saying that the so-called sins was attributed to the 7 deadly sins, not the tenets of Satanism. 7 deadly sins. I believe it's in the Old Testament somewhere, right?
That's number 8 of the 9 satanic statements that I have up here.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it was number 8. I think it was number 8 we're looking at.
Number 8
yeah.
now. But the so-called sins, right? So-called sins, which means there are no sins. It's just head games with yourself because they lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. That's all it's for.
Yeah, but you can end up going too far and end up in a bigger mess than if you're
Whatever
abstaining.
you could do is just a could and a would and a should. Doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, it's objective.
It's
If
not-
you do too much of certain things, you will destroy yourself.
It is.
Yeah, but say that about alcohol and sex as well, and
Yes.
even religion.
Well, so it's just nihilism. It's just nihilism, anti-everything. And then you're going to use the golden mean to say you're not going to kill yourself. So it's pretty unprincipled.
No, look at number 9.
Yeah, that's true, but I mean that's the same with God as well. Yeah, so Satan is a bogeyman the church used in the same way that God is.
What it is, it's atheism in a sort of
Yes.
a cheek.
Well, I prefer to look at it as a good cop, bad cop. God is the bad cop, and Jesus is the good cop. God is the God of wrath and of floods and tornadoes, and Jesus is the good cop that comes in and says, "It's okay, I love you. I'm really compassionate. You know, I want to help you, man. You know, don't listen to that dad of mine. He's really, really wrathful and jealous."
That makes me think of
But there's more hatred in Christianity than there is in Satanism.
Well, yeah, because Satanism doesn't really exist.
I'm always interested in trying to compare like philosophy with Christianity to try to find.
You're dropping in and out, bro.
But
Yeah, for once it's not me.
Yeah, your mic's a little wavy. It's a little bit of dropping in and out. Ancient Greek Christianity compared to what?
compared to each other, and Edward was just talking about how like it's a good cop bad cop kind of thing, and it just and like the golden mean where it's, you know, too much of one thing and then too much of the other, and then you balance it out in the middle, and that's where you get the good thing. And it's surprised if that's where it comes from,
Well, the golden mean comes from Aristotle.
if I'm not cutting out.
Yeah.
No, that came through okay. Yeah, if that's where Christianity came from, I mean, yeah, Christianity is bastardized Greek thought. It's Platonism more than Aristotelianism, though. But
Yeah, well, that's the Platonic element in Plato. Even, I mean, he was great, but he still had that killer element of like,
No, Plato
the
was
right thing to
was
do-
the most evil human being who ever lived.
I mean, like you've said before, and I agree that, you know, everything comes down to a battle between him and Aristotle. Aristotle had this idea that, you know, right, as opposed to just like looking at reality and like coming to that conclusion, imagine the ultimate end result of doing too much of that, and then you have to imagine like doing none of it and then balance it in the middle, and that's the way to be human. That's the right conclusion, but it's the wrong way to get to it.
depending
Does that
on
make sense?
yeah, well, you don't want a balanced number of snake bites.
Exactly.
So you on principle, some things are bad, and
You were
They
talking about
use
Anton
reason to-
LaVey earlier in hedonism, and I was thinking like, which is where she said interview, and it was you know, I'm not just promiscuous sexually because sex is too good. As like it's a choice. You can either be like abstinent or just a total hedonist. Is that like all that pleasure that most hedonists are chasing? Get that is to be selective with your choices. And so what I'm saying is like Aristotle would say, well, kill your desire to be totally mindlessly hedonistic and let go of your desire to be totally abstinent. Whereas Ayn Rand would say, think about what you are. Requires, you're not just a brain, but you're also not just a body. So those interact to the best of your capacity.
Yeah, it's the best integrated way of looking at things that anybody came up with back then anyway. So.
Well, I like this one. I like number 4. Satan represents kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates. And this is the point that Rand would make. Love, you shouldn't be a love prostitute that's just throwing love around indiscriminately. You should save it for those who deserve it. You should save it for those who represent your values. And that's true. I mean, this I love humanity and I love my neighbor and all that kind of crap. There's no discernment there. There's no they try to do the whole sort of hate the sin, love the sinner. I mean, that is so counterintuitive and useless. You've got to have some, love. You need to save your love for those who deserve it, not love everyone. How does that help?
The funniest thing is I'm thinking of leftists as you're speaking, and it's like leftists hate anything, right? Like, a Muslim can kill 100 people in the streets in Paris, but like, let's not hate Islam too much. But at the same time, you should be like totally, open to all things, but then on the opposite side, like you should just love everybody as well.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't be open to conservatism, of course, because that's evil and racist. And it's okay to hate things that directly threaten their ideology and their power, but everything else is perfectly a-okay. Because
the scariest part, I think, is that we're starting to get to the point where the leftists they don't even hate. They're starting to feel like this phony, sanctimonious compassion towards them.
Yes.
And that's when you start to get like that's when you start to get the Reaps and the Orwellian Nazi type shit.
Yeah, because
then they convince themselves that they're not you and ruining your life because like a sick dog, we have to put him down, type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, they don't want to morally distinguish. The reason why they're against any degree of moral judgment upon others, except again their ideological rivals, is because if they encourage moral independence and intellectual dependence, if they encourage independent judgment on the part of all of their members, that grants to them too much independence, and they're not, they'll lose control over them. They won't be part of the hive mind. And so that's why the left don't believe in morally judging people, no matter how evil they are. It's not a philosophy, it's pure mind control practicality. They can't lose control of these people, and so they have to destroy any sense of mental, cognitive, rational independence, and that spills over into their moral philosophy, because the morality is a side effect of reason, or a lack of it. And so they can't morally judge because they can't judge, period, because that would make them mentally independent, and that would be a threat to the collectivists.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, and I agree. And it seems like because they're like opposed to moral judgments on principle, the only way they can make judgments is on other issues, like you were saying earlier, like you psychologize about your opponents, that they're just ill.
Well, they categorize you. Yeah, they categorize you as you're a sociopath or you're autistic or whatever.
Yeah, but what's scary is that if this goes on for another few decades, maybe not even that long, they're going to lurch to the right, and you're going to start seeing where, I don't care what anybody says about how right-wing they are, the Nazis were left-wing. I mean, it's right there in the term, National Socialist. But like, if you actually read like some of the hardcore anti-Semitic stuff, those people regarded the Jews as just like to be put down. They didn't hate them. They just thought that they were like an unfortunate curse. Yeah,
the Nazis saw the Holocaust as like ugly and horrible, but something that needed to be done like a exterminator. or a sewage worker. They didn't think it was a glorious, beautiful thing. They knew it was ugly as hell, but they thought it was necessary because the Jews had to be put down because they were mentally and genetically, biologically incapable of being decent people.
Right.
And
just like all the stupid people in middle America that just can't get why socialism is so great.
Yeah, I mean, this is where a lot of that elitist snobbery comes in, because they basically just, middle America is just a bunch of inbred ingrates called Bubba, as far as the left are concerned.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and so you don't have to actually intellectually engage because you're denying them any intellectual ability. You know, they vote out of bigotry and fear and prejudice, not because they have a well thought out philosophy, which many of them actually do. Do not underestimate middle America. And so they, by refusing to acknowledge their capacity to think, you're denying the need to intellectually engage, which is handy because they lose. Period. The left are so lazy now. They've bypassed the need to intellectually engage. They're completely out of the habit of it. When you actually argue with leftists, I have brought socialists into fits of hysterics because they just can't cope with the fact that I'm not agreeing with them on anything. I think they're wrong about everything, and they just think, how could you possibly disagree on this or that or this? And it's like, yeah.
And it's just so insulting too. I mean, you know, I'm sure it's the same in England where it's, you know, like the gilded cage of London. They just look down on everybody else as a bunch of country bumpkins. But it's like, I remember thinking this when Obama was first becoming president, where like, just for whatever reason, I saw him on TV in some factory somewhere in America. And I was just like, doesn't a guy like that ever feel like inferior? Doesn't he ever like walk into a place like that and go, holy crap, what any of this does? But like, these people must be intelligent. You know, it's like, how, if everybody in the middle of America or in the hinterlands of England are so stupid, then why are there like these beautiful roads and all these power lines and these factories and these massively productive farms if we're so retarded?
They would say the government, of course.
What was it? You cut out a second.
They would say the government. They would say the government built all these beautiful things for you filthy peasants and you don't appreciate it.
That's true. That's true.
Well, this is what happened with the Brexit vote. A bunch of liberal snobs basically just said that anybody that voted for Brexit was some ignorant racist who didn't understand economics. A, no. B, even if they were right about the economics and Britain would suffer an economic catastrophe, we didn't vote on the basis of practicality. We voted to leave the EU on principle. We voted to leave the EU for the same reason America declared independence from us, because they're a bunch of tyrants and they were treading on our rights. This was an independence vote, period. And they just couldn't grasp that because principles are completely beyond their comprehension.
Right. In the comments earlier, like the liberals, some of them know that, but they just dishonestly want to ignore it, especially in the media. That's why, like, I saw the other day on the BBC where they're just blowing totally out of proportion, like a couple confused teenagers decide that like Polish immigrants are the problem, and so they yelled some Polish lady, right? And this is like the huge story, you know. This is like the next in English culture, and it's just so ridiculous. Meanwhile, there's like equally of young Muslim kids being taught Sharia, and that's just, you know, that's just cultural expression.
Yeah, because they cherry pick. They just the white people have to be in the wrong. They're all racist, and they're all basically. So you can find white racists anywhere, and you can cherry pick them and say they represent the whole, and while completely ignoring what's actually going on. Because they will say we're doing the same thing with Muslims, but we're not cherry picking. I mean, if these madrasas and mosques are teaching this as official policy, you know, the hatred of women and gays and things like that, which they are, then that is a huge problem. And the scale of it is so huge that the left can't see the wood for the trees because it's so big. You wouldn't believe how evil Islam is, and the destruction of European culture is unbelievable. But again, we're seeing this in the polls. The people are sick to death of being told that they're bigots because they're not surrendering to Islam. And so we're seeing the destruction of the left wing in Europe. It is beautiful. It's a bloodbath. The leftist parties in my country are dead. They are so dead, it's unbelievable. They've got some geriatric idiot socialist in charge of labor, and he is so hated, it's unbelievable. And the Lib Dems have lost like 90% of their seats in the last election. It's dead. It's done. I mean, they're just, you can't keep the people down anymore. And these liberal snobs are so clueless. It's like, why is this happening? Why are the racists winning? I don't understand. And I'm just like, yeah, you don't understand, and that's the problem. I don't think they ever will. They will just be in the
but they should all just
drooling.
they should all just go back to being a bunch of miserable community college, junior college professors.
You see, I missed it when socialists were just these bearded, patched elbow-wearing geriatric professors that everybody ignored. Instead of being all these powerful people that are in charge of freaking society. It's ridiculous. That's
what happens when you let the colleges get taken over by liberals. Pretty soon, everyone in society is a liberal because
they control education, they control the media, and so what's happening is leftism is a fantasy, it's a delusion. It has no connection with reality at all. But with enough professors and enough media pundits, enough John fucking Stewarts, you can convince people the black is white and up is down, and which is exactly what's happened. Which is why when people reject what the professors say and they reject the media, boom, you get a completely different type of person. This is why the anti-millennials are so interesting.
Right.
Well, at this point, we have to write off the whole millennial generation. They're just useless.
We're at our time limit for our 2-hour show at this point. So we can continue just as a hangout room, but I'll be departing to go pick up my daughter from school because she's shut her thumb in the bathroom door.
This is where everything starts to break down. When you leave, it all goes to hell.
Well, we have mods in the room, don't we?
Sort of.
I have no moderation.
Anyway.
Yeah, I've shared controls and permissions, but...
Well, it was fun while it lasted. Hope your daughter's well, Brandon. Hope it's not serious.
Oh, yeah, just her thumb, I reckon. Hope it's not broke. We'll see. All right.
Good luck with that.
Controls shared as well.
Adios.
Adios. Carry on as long as you like.
Are you stopping the live broadcast? You might want to do that. Well, when you drop out, it'll end in 5 minutes anyway.
He's not dropping out.
I'll just leave my camera on and leave it.
You might as well stop the live broadcast because then you won't have any porn bombing to edit out.
Okay.
Well, we've got mods.
Yeah, if you want to end it at 2 hours, which I usually use that kind of measurement too. 2
well,
hours.
That's true. 2 hours is enough.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to kill it now in the room.